civil service. It is highly politicized. 3, after the dissolution of the Ministry of Economic Planning and Industrial Development, the civil service lacked strategic planning capacity. There were 2 planning units, 1 sectoral planning units, 1 in education, 1 in agriculture. There may have been other technical planning units in maybe works and communications, but essentially to deal with the strategic planning end, there were those 2. The problem with those 2 is that they were both operational and not strategic in their approach. So we're back to square one. This current government tried to address one of those problems by creating a special advisor to the president and designated it as the president, the Department of Governance and Policy for Strategic Political Oversight. That's their, that is how it came out. Yes. So it tries to mimic the fact that we don't have a planning ministry anymore, but it also ends up being nothing more than an operational unit. So we have made some few recommendations. Of course, given the time period that we have, we can't really do justice to it, but at least to give you an idea of where we were headed or we want to head with this. So please, I'll leave the rest of it to Mr. Said Mati to go ahead.
Thank you very much, Uncle Sidi. I think you've basically presented what we've discussed on the area of the civil service. So I will try to avoid that. But one thing I can say is during our discussion, I think we have different generation of Gambians, and for some people like me, most of the discussion was more around revelations as to what exactly used to obtain in this country. And I think we have missed a great deal in terms of continuity, or also even in terms of changing some of the aspects. And I really enjoy our session. So I will just briefly present on some of the points that we discussed during the our cluster meeting, where which was the security sector reform process, and also maybe on the foreign service, which you already have the abstract. In terms of our security policy or security service reform, we did discuss the first points that were raised, whether we needed the military or not. I think generally we agreed that already the military exists. So what we need to discuss is not about whether we need it or not, but rather how do we make it functional or even fit for purpose in terms of right sizing, or even trying to see how best we can cut the numbers, because generally we believe it is a bloated security institution. But one of the key factors that we said contributed to that fact was the fact that the military, just like the civil service, was used more as an employment agency, where we've seen a lot of soldiers were appointed, recruited based on the fact that there were a lot of young people in the street. So it was a means of avoiding that. And the other point that we raised within the security sector reform, that it should not only focus on this traditional concept of security, where we have to, which is more regime-centric, but we have to go beyond that to the human security aspect, which we agreed are very crucial issues. And this includes how, in terms of the governance, we talk about issues of oversight, but more importantly, how do we create economic opportunities? Because right now, when you're talking about downsizing or right-sizing, is either some people will be out of the military, perhaps, or the security services in general. It is important to look for macroeconomic opportunities where these people that are out can focus on that. And I think one point that we forgot to raise, and I will maybe add it here, is the issue about in terms of more around what is the life after the security service. what is there for our people, but generally in terms of the civil service and everything. We're talking about the issue of pension. You know, how much are people earning after their service? I think these are issues that need to be also factored in when we're talking about the security sector reform generally. And another point raised was that the need for investment in technical skills, that our security service must also have that technical skills, and the need for them to move from that subjective control, the politicization of the security service, more into an objective arm that will, instead of defending an individual's interest, will collectively defend the interests of the country. So the other aspect of the discussion was around the need to properly assess. Before we say we just want to reform, we need to properly assess what is it exactly that we need to change and why we must change. We must have a rational approach to those issues. I think these are some of the points that I captured under the security sector reform. And quickly on the foreign service, I think this was the point where I was just listening instead of writing, because I feel like as a young Gambian, there are a lot of things that we need to know. We are not aware, and I think there's a need, as we were discussing at the closing, the need to write about these issues so that the next generation can learn. And I think one of the biggest challenges to our progress democratically and socially as well as economically, always every generation starts anew or start from fresh. I think there's a need to bridge this gap before moving forward. So we within the foreign service, we agree generally that the foreign service is part of the civil service, but it's also a specialized area where, since independence has been really crucial, before '94, very crucial in not only pushing for our recognition as a small country, but also being very active in the diplomatic community. So with that, I'll just conclude. In terms of the recommendations that were made, civil service like the security service or even the civil service in general is bloated in terms of the number of people. And I think one of the issues that we discussed was selective selection of missions, where we don't just operate anywhere because it's also costly and you need the right skills, the right equipment to a certain extent, and mission. So first recommendation is the need to infuse or step up professionalism within the diplomatic service, and by increasing the number of career diplomats and ceasing to regard diplomatic posting as political compensation posts, which is unfortunately a reality in our case. And secondly, rationalize the opening of diplomatic missions abroad because of the high cost of maintaining them in the current state of the public finance, ensure that cadres below the rank of head of mission are filled by professionals, and finally establish a systematic training program for the diplomats to improve competence and professionalism in the service. So I'll basically stop here, and maybe group members, if I miss anything or they want to add more to the discussions, can look at that. But in conclusion, one of the key elements that came true was the issue of leadership, which is very central to all these reform processes that we are talking about. And I think leadership is not only key in terms of the position, but in terms of the head of state, but in terms of different departments and areas that need focus. And with leadership also, I think we discuss issues around attitudinal change, which is also very, very key in that. So you'll excuse me if I miss anything because I was learning more than anything else. Thank you.
Very well.
Yeah. Yes, I mentioned. Yes, I mentioned. Yes.
Yes, he's covered that.
And you mentioned about, it's only the civil service that I did not mention because Uncle CD. Yeah, we started that. Yes. Yeah. One aspect, when we were discussing about the security sector reform, we did not only stop at the security institution, but we also believe that the judiciary is also part of the, maybe you were the one that raised that. It was also a very important instrument in terms of law and order. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah.
really endemic disease. But results and have to do with law support. And we all know that in Gambia, private are not based on the government. One to 5,000. There is an urgent need to raise salaries. Nigeria has just moved towards that end because they recently adopted a minimum wages that cover, the real cost of living. So I'm wondering whether you can, include it in your findings. Thanks.
Yeah, it is not specifically stated, but it is implied when we talk about the rationalization of the civil service. Because this is why we were insisting on government. Before you even raise the salaries of civil servants for 50%, which is one of the problems they are faced with now, you need to first and foremost restructure so that you can be able to get savings, and out of that savings you can use that to augment the salaries of those that are in place. But it is implied in the rationalization exercise. No, okay. I think here. Okay, yes. Senghor, then Flexdan, then Barrow. Barrow, why don't you give them chance to and then you can come later because you are part of the security. And then, Doctor.
So since I'm the runner, can I go next? No, I'm just kidding.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thanks for a very good job well done within the time frame. I just wanted to draw your attention to something that I think should be considered, if I'm right. It's regards to prevention. I think we can talk about security reform and all this, but the whole question of risk analysis and also using the outcome of those analyses to do some preventive or to design some preventive action. Let's take a look at this country. I mean, what is often called the demographic dividend can be a demographic deficit. Because of many young people who are unemployed, who don't have access to so many things, they become a risk factor as well. So what can we do in terms of preventing? I think Mr. Jeng this morning highlighted and buttressed the need for preventive measures to be taken. So if we're talking about security reform and all these other things, I've not gone into the policy that was launched yesterday, but I think the whole question of prevention, it's more important than anything else, because if we don't prevent, we will just be reactive rather than being proactive. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I need to ask.
No, you're right. And I think you should be afforded the privilege. Thank you so much for your submission. I really appreciate it and I learned. I just wanted to throw in one thing which I think will change the civil service entirely. Totally. Hear this one. It's a radical move, as always. I think it might just be. We have so many people in the civil service who, one, cannot do their job. Why? Because they actually don't have the right certificates. What we need is a small team that reviews everybody in the civil service and their documentation, how they managed to get that job. They did this in Tanzania. If you came in with a forged certificate, guess what? You're issued to know that you have to vacate.